On a summer morning in 1979, a well-dressed stranger walked into a small granite company in rural Georgia. He was calm, polite, and precise. He said his name was Robert Christian. He said he represented a small group of Americans who had been secretly planning a project for 20 years. He placed a detailed scale model on the desk, and then he explained what he wanted built. The granite company president thought he was a lunatic. To discourage the man from following through, he quoted a price several times higher than the actual cost. The stranger accepted without hesitation, paid in full, and left. 14 months later, a 19-foot monument of polished granite rose from a hilltop in Elbert County, Georgia. It was aligned with the sun, the moon, and the stars with extraordinary precision. Inscribed on its surface, in 8 languages, were 10 commandments, not from the Bible, but from whoever Robert Christian really was. Rules for a new civilization. Instructions for survivors of a catastrophe that had not yet happened. Nobody knew who built it. Nobody knew why. And 42 years later, before anyone could find out, someone blew it up. This is the story of the Georgia Guidestones, and almost nothing about it is what it appears to be. Elberton, Georgia calls itself the granite capital of the world. It is a small, quiet town about 100 miles east of Atlanta, surrounded by red clay hills and Baptist churches. It is not the kind of place where you expect to find one of the most mysterious monuments in American history. But on March 22, 1980, a crowd gathered on a hilltop outside town to watch the unveiling of something that would puzzle the world for the next 4 decades. The structure consisted of 6 massive granite slabs, 4 upright outer stones, 1 central pillar, and a capstone on top. Together they weighed more than 120 tons. Workers had to dig more than 100 feet into a quarry just to find slabs large enough. The finished monument stood nearly as tall as a 2-story building. Its astronomical features were engineered with remarkable precision. A hole drilled through the center pillar aligned perfectly with the North Star every night of the year. A slot in the capstone tracked the sun's position at noon, identifying the exact day of the year. The 4 outer stones marked the extreme positions of the moon across its entire 18-and-a-half-year cycle. Whoever designed this monument understood celestial mechanics at a serious level. But it was the inscriptions that made people stop and stare. In English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. The same 10 guidelines were engraved on every face of the outer stones. They spoke of maintaining humanity under 500 million people, of guiding reproduction wisely, of uniting humanity with a single living language, of ruling passion with reason, of leaving room for nature, of seeking harmony with the infinite. Some people read them and found wisdom. Others read them and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Georgia wind. The first guideline, maintaining the world's population under 500 million, meant, by simple arithmetic, the elimination of more than 90% of every human being then alive. The creators of this monument had not hidden that implication. They had carved it in stone, in 8 languages, and placed it on a hilltop for anyone to read. A local pastor who attended the unveiling immediately called it a monument for devil worship. Conspiracy theories spread within weeks. The Illuminati, the New World Order, secret societies pulling strings from the shadows. The pseudonym R.C. Christian was said to be a direct reference to Christian Rosenkreutz, the legendary founder of the Rosicrucians, a secretive mystical brotherhood dating to the 15th century. Meanwhile, the only 2 people who had ever met Robert Christian in person, the granite company president and a local banker named Wyatt Martin, had both sworn an oath of secrecy and refused to reveal his identity. All documentation related to the project had been destroyed the moment construction was complete. Robert Christian had vanished. and the stones remained. If this kind of story is exactly what keeps you up at night, real mysteries that nobody has fully solved, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell. This is what we do here every week. For decades, investigators, journalists, and curious citizens tried to unmask Robert Christian. In 2015, a documentary filmmaker got closer than anyone when an Elberton banker accidentally revealed part of a document on camera. Researchers followed the trail. It led to a man named Herbert Kirsten, an Iowa physician who had died in 2005, who had written extensively about population control and shared many of the ideological views expressed on the stones. CNN investigated the same lead years later and reached the same conclusion. But no one could prove it. Kirsten was dead. Martin, the banker, still refused to speak, and the stones could not answer. What we know for certain is this. Whoever built the Georgia Guidestones had significant money, over $400,000 in today's value. They had spent 20 years planning. They had access to sophisticated astronomical knowledge. And they believed, deeply and sincerely, that civilization was approaching a catastrophe, most likely nuclear war, and that survivors would need guidance on how to rebuild a better world. In that context, the Guidestones were not a threat. They were a warning, a message in a bottle, cast forward in time to people who might find it after everything had fallen apart. Whether you find that beautiful or terrifying probably says something about you. On July 6, 2022, at 4 in the morning, neighbors across Elbert County heard an explosion. When the sheriff arrived at the hilltop, one of the outer stones had been destroyed. The remaining structure was deemed unsafe. By that same afternoon, everything was gone, demolished, cleared, as if it had never existed. Surveillance footage captured a blurry figure approaching the monument in the darkness, carrying something large, then running away. No arrests have ever been made. No motive has ever been officially established. The identity of whoever destroyed the Georgia Guidestones remains as unknown as the identity of whoever built them. A small marker still sits on the hilltop in Elbert County. The granite slabs are gone. The time capsule, listed on a plaque as buried 6 feet below the monument, was never recovered. When workers cleared the site, they searched. They found nothing. It is possible the capsule was never placed. It is possible it was removed before the demolition. It is possible it is still down there, sealed in the Georgia clay, waiting for someone who never came. 42 years, an anonymous message carved in stone in 8 languages, a warning to a future that never asked for it. Destroyed in a single morning by someone who decided the world didn't need the warning after all. We still don't know who wanted those stones to stand. We still don't know who needed them to fall. And whatever was buried beneath them, it remains in the dark, unanswered, like every other question this monument left behind. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, share it with someone who still believes they know who's really in charge. Imagine finding a message from a lost world, a guide, a warning, something built just for you, hoping to light your way. Now picture someone else, someone with different ideas, coming along and destroying it, piece by piece. That's the story we're diving into today, a tale of 2 groups, a monumental effort, and a devastating loss. So, let's set the scene. The world had gone through something terrible, a global disaster that reshaped everything. The old ways were gone, replaced by a harsh new reality where survival was the only rule. Amidst the dust and the quiet ruins, people were just trying to get by, to piece together a life from the fragments of what remained. It was a time of immense struggle, but also of invention and resilience. In this broken world, a group emerged, known simply as the Builders. They weren't just focused on finding food or shelter for the day. They had a grander vision, a profound sense of responsibility to those who would come after them. The Builders decided to create something truly extraordinary. They envisioned a landmark, a massive monument that would stand as a beacon of hope and knowledge. This wasn't some quick project. This was their life's work, a testament to what humanity could achieve even in its darkest hour. They wanted to leave a message for future generations, a detailed account of what happened, why it happened, and how to avoid making the same mistakes again. It was meant to be a survival guide, a history lesson, and a promise that life could and would go on. The construction of this monument was an epic undertaking. It took years, perhaps even decades, of relentless effort. The builders scoured the scarred landscape for materials, repurposing whatever they could find. Every stone, every beam, every piece of salvaged metal was carefully selected and meticulously placed. This wasn't just a pile of rocks thrown together. It was a work of art, a feat of engineering, and a labor of love. They designed it with intricate symbols carved into its surfaces, telling stories without words. There were detailed writings, painstakingly etched, preserving crucial information about the past, about the disaster itself, and about the natural world. It was a library, a school, and a memorial, all rolled into one colossal structure. The monument grew slowly, steadily, becoming a central point for the builders. It represented their collective will, their unwavering belief in the future. As it rose from the desolate landscape, it became more than just bricks and mortar. It became a living symbol. It promised wisdom, guidance, and a path forward for those who would inherit the earth. It stood there for a long time, a silent promise, a towering testament to human spirit and foresight, waiting for the eyes of future generations to discover its secrets and learn from its wisdom. It was a monumental achievement, a shining example of hope in a world shrouded by despair. It was designed to endure, to speak across time, its message clear for anyone willing to listen and understand. It embodied the very essence of their survival, a legacy forged in hardship and hope. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. But then, a different group appeared on the scene. They weren't like the builders. This new group, let's call them the destroyers, had their own ideas about how things should be. They saw the world through a different lens, a lens colored by their own experiences and beliefs, which were very different from those who had spent years crafting the monument. Maybe they didn't understand the deep meaning behind the message etched into the stone, or maybe they simply didn't care. To them, this grand structure, this supposed beacon of hope, was something else entirely. Perhaps they saw it as a symbol of the very world that had collapsed, a monument to the failures of the past that needed to be erased. They might have believed that to truly rebuild, one had to first clear away all traces of what came before, even if those traces were meant to be lessons. The monument to the destroyers wasn't a guide. It was a burden, a reminder of old mistakes, or even a threat to their own vision for the future. They had different plans for how society should be organized, different rules they wanted to establish, and the silent, imposing presence of the builder's legacy stood in their way. We don't know the exact reasons for their actions. The motivations of the destroyers are lost to time, overshadowed by the physical act of demolition. Was it fear? Ignorance? A desire for absolute control over the narrative of the future? Or simply a profound disagreement with the philosophy embedded in the monument's every stone? Whatever their reasoning, they decided that this structure, built with such painstaking care and hope, needed to be removed. It wasn't about understanding, it was about elimination. So, just as the builders had gathered their resources and their collective will to construct, the destroyers began to gather theirs for a very different purpose. They brought their own tools, their own methods, and their own kind of determination. This was not an accidental collapse or a natural decay. This was a deliberate, calculated decision to dismantle, to erase, to make sure that the message intended for future generations would never be heard. Their approach was systematic, reflecting a clear objective: to leave no trace of what the builders had created. They saw the monument not as a source of wisdom, but as an obstacle. It represented an ideology they rejected, a past they wanted to bury completely. The very idea that someone else had presumed to dictate a path for the future, to leave instructions for those yet to come, might have been offensive to them. They wanted to forge their own path, unburdened by the echoes of a previous era, and the monument stood as a giant stone echo. Its existence was a challenge to their authority, a competing vision that they felt compelled to eliminate. The destroyers' actions were a stark contrast to the patient, hopeful work of the builders. Where one group sought to preserve and enlighten, the other sought to obliterate and redefine. The monument, which had stood for so long as a silent promise, now faced a new kind of force, one that saw its value not in its message, but in its absence. This was a conflict not of arms, but of ideas, played out on the grand scale of a massive, symbolic structure. The stage was set for a dramatic and irreversible act, one that would change the landscape and the future forever. The decision was made, the tools were ready, and the fate of the builders' legacy was sealed. They gathered their own resources, their own tools, and they systematically dismantled or blew up this incredible structure. The destroyers moved with a chilling efficiency. They didn't just smash things randomly. Their actions were organized, almost surgical in their precision. They had surveyed the monument, understood its weak points, and planned their attack with grim determination. Explosives, salvaged from forgotten military depots, were strategically placed. Heavy machinery, perhaps re-engineered from old construction equipment, was brought in to tear down the larger sections. It was a methodical destruction, piece by painstaking piece. The symbols carved into the stone, meant to convey stories and warnings, were defaced, then shattered. The detailed writings, the carefully etched knowledge of the past, were ground into dust. Walls that had stood for decades, bearing the weight of hope and history, crumbled under the force of their will. The sheer scale of the demolition mirrored the scale of the original construction. Just as the builders had poured their lives into creating it, the destroyers now poured their energy into erasing it. The message, the hope, the history, all gone. It wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act. The monument, once a towering symbol of resilience and a guide for future generations, was reduced to rubble. The very idea of a shared past, of lessons learned and passed down, was systematically wiped away. The destroyers weren't just destroying a building. They were destroying a narrative, a potential future built on the wisdom of the past. They were asserting their own version of reality, where the only valid history was the one they created, and the only path forward was the one they forged. The people who built it might have been long gone, or maybe some still remembered it, watching it disappear. It's hard to imagine the feelings of any surviving builders if they were still alive to witness this act. Perhaps they were elderly, hidden away, unable to intervene, forced to watch their life's work, their ultimate legacy, being torn apart. The thought of their quiet despair, their profound sense of loss, hangs heavy in the air. Their sacrifice, their years of toil, their unwavering belief in the future, all rendered meaningless by a new generation with a different agenda. The monument was supposed to speak to future generations, to offer them a hand up, a way to avoid the mistakes that led to the global disaster. Now, those future generations would never hear the message. They would be left to wander, blind to the past, forced to rediscover truths that had already been painfully learned. So, what does that tell us? Even after everything collapses, human nature stays the same. The cycle of creation and destruction, of hope and despair, continues. The instincts to build, to preserve, to teach, clash violently with the impulses to destroy, to forget, to control. It shows that even in the face of utter devastation, the fundamental conflicts within humanity persist. The desire for legacy, the struggle for ideological dominance, the fight over what truth should prevail, these are deeply ingrained. We build, we destroy, we try to leave our mark. And sometimes, someone else comes along and erases it. The monument was a mark left by the builders, a testament to their vision. The destruction of it was the destroyer's mark, a statement of their power and their opposing vision. This isn't just a story about a physical structure. It's a story about the constant struggle for meaning and control over history. It reminds us that even the most enduring symbols can be undone, not by time or nature, but by human hands driven by conflicting beliefs. It makes you wonder what messages we're leaving behind today, and who might try to take them down tomorrow. Are our own monuments, our own digital archives, our own cultural touchstones truly safe? What do we consider important enough to preserve for future generations, and what forces might arise to challenge that preservation? The story of the builders and the destroyers is a stark reminder that the future is never guaranteed, and that the struggle to define it, to guide it, or to erase parts of it, is an ongoing human endeavor.